The evening started like any other shift for Emily Carter. The soft hum of conversation filled the grand hall of the Silver Oak Hotel, and the scent of roasted herbs and freshly baked bread drifted through the air. She adjusted the white apron around her waist, balancing a tray of glasses as she moved carefully between the round tables covered in white linen. The guests were already beginning to arrive, their laughter mixing with the soft clinking of silverware. Emily worked quietly, almost invisible among the crowd. She had learned long ago that the best waiters were the ones people barely noticed, the ones who could refill a glass, clear a plate, and vanish again without interrupting a single word of conversation. That was her way, calm, careful, unseen, but behind her polite smile and quiet presence there was a different story. Emily wasn't always a waitress. A few years ago she had been known for something entirely different, for the way her fingers could dance across piano keys and fill a room with music that made people close their eyes and listen. Back then, her dream had been clear. She wanted to become a concert pianist. She had practiced day and night, her hands sometimes sore and cramped, her back aching from long hours at the bench, but none of that mattered when she played. The music gave her a feeling of freedom, a kind of voice she didn't have in words. Everything changed when her father fell sick. It happened suddenly. One day he was fine, laughing as he fixed a loose chair leg in the kitchen, and a week later he was in a hospital bed, pale and weak. The bills began piling up faster than her mother could pay them. Emily was still in music school then, studying under a teacher who believed she had real talent. But dreams, she learned, didn't pay for medicine or hospital stays. She left her studies quietly, telling her teacher she would return after a short break. She took a job at the Silver Oak Hotel, planning to save money for a few months. A few months turned into years. Now instead of piano keys, she touched cold glass and polished silver. Instead of applause, she heard the ring of orders from the kitchen bell. Still, she tried not to complain. Her father's health had improved a little, and her job helped keep the family steady. But sometimes when the restaurant was empty and the soft light reflected off the polished piano in the corner of the lobby, Emily would pause for a moment, remembering how it once felt to play. That piano, a glossy black grand that stood like a centerpiece, was the first thing guests saw when they entered the ballroom. Every time she passed it, she felt a small tug in her chest. The staff weren't allowed to touch it, of course. Only the hired musicians could. But sometimes, when no one was around, she would run her fingers lightly across the keys just to feel them under her skin again. The night of the gala, the hotel was busier than usual. It was one of those charity events that drew wealthy guests from across the city, business owners, socialites, and politicians. The kind of people who like to be seen in the right place at the right time. Emily could feel the tension in the air even before her shift began. The event manager, Mr. Harlow, was pacing back and forth near the entrance, checking his watch every few seconds. "Carter," he called as she passed, "make sure every glass is spotless. And don't forget the wine service starts at 7 sharp. Everything needs to be perfect tonight." "Yes, sir," she replied, keeping her voice steady. He nodded and walked off, already scolding another waiter about the placement of napkins. Emily sighed quietly and returned to the preparation table. She didn't mind hard work, but nights like these always made her uneasy. There was a certain kind of energy among wealthy guests, the kind that made staff feel like furniture, something that was useful but invisible. By 6:30, the first guests had started arriving. Emily smiled politely, greeting them with soft words and careful gestures as she guided them to their tables. She could already hear laughter echoing from the far end of the hall. The chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting golden light across the marble floor. At the corner of the room stood the grand piano, its lid lifted, waiting for the evening's hired pianist. The sight made her heart ache a little, though she told herself not to think about it. By 7, the room was full. Waiters moved like clockwork, delivering plates of appetizers and glasses of champagne. The host of the night, a woman in a glittering silver gown, took the stage to welcome everyone. Emily listened from the edge of the room while arranging glasses on a tray. The woman's voice was calm and confident as she spoke about charity, generosity, and community. Then she smiled and said, "And now, let's enjoy some wonderful live music to set the mood." There was a pause, a longer one than usual. The guests looked toward the piano, waiting for the performer. But no one appeared. Emily noticed Mr. Harlow whispering anxiously into his phone. A minute later, he hung up and rubbed his forehead. She could tell from his face that something had gone wrong. The murmur of conversation began to rise. Guests looked at each other, confused. Some started joking about the dramatic silence. Emily approached quietly. "Is everything all right, sir?" she asked. "The pianist," he muttered. "There's been an accident on the highway." He stuck. "Might not make it tonight." "Oh," she said softly. He exhaled deeply. "We can't have silence. It'll ruin the mood. Maybe I can play some music through the speakers." But the hotel's sound system wasn't known for its quality. A few minutes later, the speakers crackled and hissed when he tried to test them. He cursed under his breath. Emily hesitated. Her eyes drifted to the piano again. The keys were gleaming under the lights, untouched. "Sir," she said carefully, "if you'd like, I could play a little. Just until the pianist arrives." Mr. Harlow turned to her, surprised. You play?" "Yes, sir," she said, keeping her voice low. "I used to. I studied for several years." He looked skeptical, glancing at her uniform, her simple black shoes, her hair tied neatly back. "This is a very formal event, Carter. We can't afford mistakes, I understand," she said quickly. "But it's better than silence, isn't it? I can play something soft. Just background music." He hesitated, glancing around the room. The guests were starting to grow restless. Some had already begun asking questions. He finally sighed. "All right, fine, just keep it simple. Nothing too dramatic. And don't let anyone say I forced you into this, understood?" She nodded, her heart pounding. "Yes, sir." As she walked toward the piano, she could feel eyes following her. Some guests looked amused, whispering behind their hands. A waitress playing the grand piano, it was unheard of. Emily's palms were damp. She hadn't played seriously in years. The last time she touched a piano for more than a few minutes was in her tiny apartment, on an old keyboard with 2 broken keys. This grand instrument felt like something sacred, elegant, powerful, alive. She pulled out the bench slowly and sat down. For a moment, she didn't move. The room had fallen oddly quiet. Even the servers near the kitchen paused to watch. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the glossy black surface of the piano lid. She took a deep breath and placed her fingers gently on the keys. They felt cool and smooth, familiar in a way that made her chest tighten. Then she played a single note. It echoed softly through the hall, pure, clear, and trembling. Her fingers began to move slowly, almost uncertainly at first. She started with a gentle melody she remembered from her early lessons, something simple, calm, but filled with emotion. As she played, her hands began to relax. The old muscle memory came back, flowing like water. The sound spread through the hall, wrapping around the chatter, calming it. The guests turned their heads, curiosity replacing their earlier irritation. The clinking of glasses grew fainter. The music carried warmth, not from perfection, but from something deeply human. Emily's heart raced. She hadn't felt this alive in years. Each note brought back memories, her father smiling as she practiced at home, her teacher's voice urging her to play from her heart, the feeling of being lost in sound. When she finished the short piece, there was a moment of silence, soft, almost sacred. Then a few people began to clap politely. Mr. Harlow looked stunned, though he tried to hide it behind a professional expression. "Not bad," he murmured under his breath. "Keep playing," she nodded, swallowing her nerves. And so she did. As the night went on, she continued playing softly, moving from one melody to another. The guests began to talk again, but now their voices blended gently with the music instead of rising above it. A few even smiled at her as they passed. Emily didn't notice the time passing. She just played. For the first time, not for practice, not for an audience, but because she loved it. When the last guest began to leave, she finally stopped. Her hands rested quietly on the keys. The room felt peaceful, almost empty. Mr. Harlow approached her, still looking half surprised. "You did well tonight, Carter. Better than I expected." "Thank you, sir," she said softly. He hesitated for a moment. "You should have told me you could play like that." She smiled faintly. "I didn't think it mattered anymore." He gave a short laugh and shook his head. "Well, tonight it mattered a great deal." When the lights dimmed and the last trays were cleared, Emily lingered for a moment beside the piano. The air was quiet now, filled with the faint scent of flowers and candle wax. She ran her hand gently across the keys one last time. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like just a waitress. She felt like herself again. The hours after the gala passed in a blur. The silver plates had been cleared away, the glasses washed, and the crystal chandeliers dimmed to a soft glow. Emily stood in the quiet hallway, still in her apron, staring at the piano where she had played just a few hours ago. She felt a strange calmness wash over her. It wasn't the usual exhaustion from a long shift, but something deeper, something more personal. She walked past the piano one last time, her fingers lightly brushing against the cool surface. It felt surreal to her that just a few hours ago she had been standing there, playing without thinking, without worrying about who was watching. For a brief moment she had been herself again, not the invisible waitress, but someone who could create something beautiful. But as she left the ballroom, the reality of her life began to creep back in. She was still a waitress. The piano, no matter how much she longed to play it, was not hers to claim. And the applause from the guests, though genuine, was fleeting. They would forget about her as soon as they walked out of the hotel doors. Her shift ended late that night, and she walked back to the staff break room. The other waiters were chatting in low voices, already out of their uniforms, their work forgotten for the evening. Emily barely said a word as she changed into her street clothes. She felt disconnected, almost like she wasn't a part of the world around her. As she walked out into the cool night air, the hum of the city seemed distant, muffled. She wondered if anyone outside of the hotel would ever know about the woman who had played the piano that night, or if it would just fade away into the background noise of their lives. The guests, the event manager, even the pianist who had arrived late. They would move on with their own stories, their own lives. Emily would return to her small apartment, where the only music was the sound of the city outside her window. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from her mother. "How's the event, sweetie? Hope it's going well. Let me know when you get home safe." Emily smiled softly as she typed a quick reply. "It went well. Mom, I'm heading home now." She had been so focused on her work lately that she hadn't really shared much about her past, about the music she used to play. Her mother still believed Emily would one day go back to it. She was the one who kept telling her she hadn't lost her talent, that it was just a matter of time. But Emily wasn't sure anymore. It was easy to tell herself that playing the piano was a dream that belonged to a different version of her, someone who hadn't been weighed down by bills, by her father's illness, by the daily grind of life. When she got home, the apartment was empty, just the way she liked it. Her roommates were out, and the silence wrapped around her like a familiar blanket. She dropped her bag on the couch and went straight to the small keyboard in the corner of the room. It was an old one. The keys were worn and the sound wasn't quite right, but it was all she could afford. She sat down and ran her fingers over the keys just to feel them again. She didn't play anything special, just a simple scale, the kind of thing she had practiced over and over when she was younger. Her hands moved almost automatically, the muscle memory coming back, the familiar rhythm calming her. She had forgotten how good it felt to lose herself in the music. After a few minutes, she stopped. She felt a strange lump in her throat, and for a moment she just sat there, staring at the keys. It wasn't just the music that she missed. It was the feeling of being someone with a purpose, of having something that was hers. When she played, she felt alive, connected to something bigger than herself. But that was a long time ago. She had given up that part of her life for a reason, and it was hard to see how she could ever get it back. She turned off the keyboard and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Her mind kept replaying the events of the evening, the surprised looks on the guests' faces when she had sat down at the piano, the way the room had gone silent as she played. It wasn't the first time she had played for an audience, but it had been the first time in years that it felt like more than just an obligation. It had felt like a gift. The next morning, as she sat at the small kitchen table eating a quick breakfast, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize. Curiosity piqued, she answered. "Hello? Hi, is this Emily?" A voice asked. "Yes, this is Emily. Who's this?" "This is Jane from the Silver Oak Hotel. I'm with the events team. We just wanted to thank you again for stepping in last night and playing the piano. It really made the night. We've had a lot of positive feedback." Emily blinked, not quite sure what to say. "Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad it helped. We're actually hosting another event next month," Jane continued. "And the pianist we booked for it had to cancel. We were wondering if you'd be interested in filling in for him. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Me? She asked, almost in disbelief. Yeah, Jane said, her tone warm. We remember how well you played and the guests really enjoyed it. Would you be interested? Emily sat back in her chair, trying to wrap her mind around what she was hearing. Was she really being asked to perform again? To play at an event in front of people? I'm not sure, she stammered. I don't know if I can do it. I understand, Jane said, her voice gentle. But think about it. You clearly still have the talent, and we would love to have you. No pressure, of course, but if you're interested, we can discuss the details. Emily felt a rush of emotions flood through her. Excitement, doubt, fear. It was tempting, so tempting to say yes, but the practical side of her mind kept pushing back. She hadn't played for a crowd in years. What if she wasn't good enough anymore? What if she froze up or made a mistake in front of people? I'll think about it, she said finally. Thank you for calling, Jane. The conversation ended and Emily sat there for a long moment staring at the phone in her hand. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. It would be so easy to decline, to tell Jane that she wasn't available, that it wasn't worth the risk, but deep down, Emily knew that this was the opportunity she had been waiting for, an invitation to step back into the world she had once loved. To play music again. The question was, could she do it? Could she face the fear and take the chance? The next few days passed in a blur of uncertainty. Emily went to work as usual, her routine unchanged, but the phone call kept echoing in her mind. She felt torn between two worlds, the one she had built for herself in the hotel, and the one that had once been full of music and dreams. By the end of the week, Emily made a decision. She would take the risk. She would play. That evening, she called Jane back. I'm in, she said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. I'll do it. The excitement she felt was real, but so was the fear. She had taken the first step, but the rest of the journey and the practice, the performance, the vulnerability of being in front of an audience again would be much harder. But she was ready. She had to be. As she hung up the phone, she glanced over at the dusty keyboard in the corner. For the first time in years, she felt like she might be able to reclaim a part of herself that had been lost, and that in itself was worth every bit of fear. The days leading up to the event felt like a blur of uncertainty, excitement and old memories coming back in waves. Emily found herself practicing on her old keyboard every spare moment she had. It wasn't the grand piano from the hotel, but it would have to do. She still couldn't get over the fact that she had said yes. She was going to perform again, and for real this time. No more hiding behind the kitchen doors or standing in the shadows. It was her turn to step back into the spotlight, and it felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Her hands had a way of moving over the keys automatically, but there was still a deep, lingering fear every time she hit a wrong note or stumbled through a difficult passage. She hadn't played anything serious in years, and that old feeling of being out of practice haunted her. Yet each time she played, she felt a small spark reignite inside her. For a brief moment, the world around her seemed to fade, and she was simply Emily, lost in the music once again. She practiced everything she knew, sticking to simple pieces that felt comfortable. It was enough to get her started, but as the date of the performance drew closer, she began to realize just how much she had forgotten. There were certain pieces she used to play with ease, sonatas and nocturnes, that now felt foreign to her. She couldn't even remember some of the complicated finger movements. On the morning of the event, Emily woke early. She had barely slept the night before. The nerves were too much to ignore, buzzing under her skin like electricity. She could already hear the questions echoing in her head. What if she messed up? What if the guests didn't like her music? What if they didn't even care? The hotel had already started to prepare for the evening. Emily had received a schedule from Jane the day before, with clear instructions on when she should arrive and what to wear. It all seemed so formal, so real. She was nervous, but there was also an undeniable sense of thrill in the air. After all, she had spent years dreaming of moments like this, though she had never imagined they would come so suddenly. She decided to take a walk that morning to calm her mind. The weather was cool, the streets crowded with people rushing to work, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like an outsider. She wasn't rushing to an office or a meeting, but to a gig she hadn't even dared to hope for just a few days ago. The thought made her both anxious and hopeful, and with every step the nerves started to quiet down just a little. When she arrived at the hotel, it was already bustling with preparations. The staff was running around, checking everything from lighting to flowers, making sure the room would be perfect. Emily changed quickly in the staff room, putting on the simple dress that Jane had suggested, the one she'd never thought she'd wear to perform. She was still trying to process that this was actually happening. The dress felt different from the usual waitress uniform. It was elegant, but still, she felt like she didn't belong in it. Mr. Harlow, the event manager, saw her as soon as she walked out of the staff area. He gave her a brief nod, but his eyes didn't linger. Emily wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. He was always busy, always moving fast, but there was something in the way he looked at her, like she was just another part of the evening's plan, not a person. As she made her way toward the piano, she noticed the space around it had already been cleared. The guests would soon be arriving, and the piano would be the centerpiece of the evening, as it always was. Emily stood in front of it for a moment, feeling both nervous and oddly comforted by its presence. She ran her fingers lightly across the polished surface, taking a slow, deep breath. When Jane came to check on her a few minutes later, she looked much more relaxed than Emily felt. "You look great," Jane said, giving her an encouraging smile. "Are you ready?" "I think so," Emily replied, her voice a little shaky. "It's been a while since I've played in front of people." Jane nodded sympathetically. "You'll do great. Remember, it's just background music at first. No pressure. We just need you to set the mood. You're not expected to play a full concert or anything." Emily nodded, though the thought of playing just background music made her nervous. She had always taken music seriously. Each note, each piece was an opportunity to express something real. The idea of playing lightly, almost carelessly, didn't sit well with her. But she had promised Jane she would go with it. The first guests began to arrive, and the air in the room grew thicker with anticipation. Emily tried to focus, tried to calm her shaking hands as she sat down at the piano. For a few moments, all she could hear were the guests' voices in the distance, the rustling of clothes, the clinking of glasses. No one seemed to be paying attention to her yet, and that, strangely enough, was a comfort. She adjusted herself on the bench, trying to relax. It was just her and the piano now, nothing else mattered. She played a few soft scales to warm up her fingers. The sound echoed faintly in the empty room, and for a brief moment Emily felt herself slip into the zone she had once known so well. The quiet of the room helped center her, and before she knew it, she was ready to begin. Her first piece was simple, a well-known melody that she had played countless times. Something familiar. As her fingers moved over the keys, the room grew quieter. It wasn't immediate, just a soft hush at first, but Emily felt the shift. The guests who had been talking slowly stopped, drawn in by the music. They looked toward her, and the quiet grew more intense. It wasn't perfect, not by any means. She hit a few wrong notes, but it didn't matter. The guests didn't seem to notice. They were entranced, and for Emily that was enough. Her nerves slowly faded as she played on. She transitioned into another piece, one she had practiced more than any other in recent days. The melody was light and soft, and as she played, she noticed the guests starting to move a little more slowly. They didn't rush so much anymore. Their voices lowered. Their steps softened. She played for what felt like hours, though it could have been only a short while. The music filled the room, wrapping itself around the chatter, turning it into something smoother, more cohesive. It wasn't loud or demanding. It was gentle and almost comforting. Emily could hear the guests react to it. They weren't just listening. They were feeling it. Every so often, Emily would look up from the piano, her eyes catching the faces of the people scattered across the room. Some were smiling, others lost in their thoughts. There was a sense of connection, a shared moment of peace in the middle of all the noise. She didn't need to see them applauding or praising her. The way they looked at her, the way they stopped what they were doing, told her everything she needed to know. And then, as she was about to transition into another piece, something unexpected happened. The door at the back of the room opened, and in walked the pianist, the one who had been late to the last event. He was tall, with a serious look on his face. He glanced around the room and immediately noticed Emily at the piano. For a split second she froze, unsure what to do. He seemed confused, even a little annoyed. He walked toward her, his steps deliberate. Emily thought for a moment he might ask her to step aside, to let him take over. But instead he simply stood behind her, watching. She took a deep breath and kept playing, even though her heart was racing. She didn't want to stop now. After a moment, the pianist leaned over her shoulder. "You're doing fine," he said, his voice soft. "Keep going." She almost couldn't believe it. Here she was, sitting at the piano, playing in front of a professional pianist, and he was telling her to keep going. It was a small moment, but to Emily it felt like a huge confirmation. She wasn't just filling in anymore. She was doing something real. With his encouragement, she finished the piece and looked up at him again. He nodded and smiled. "You've got a lot of talent. Don't forget that." And for the first time in years, Emily believed it. The guests continued to chat and mingle, their attention never fully leaving the music. Emily, now with the confidence to continue, played on. The rest of the night seemed to pass in a haze, as if Emily had stepped into a different world where time moved differently. After the pianist's brief but encouraging words, her confidence grew, and she played on without hesitation. She could feel the music flowing from her fingertips, each note more confident than the last. The guests had settled into a quieter rhythm, their conversations blending into the background as her piano music became the focal point. It wasn't just background noise anymore. People weren't just passing by. They were stopping to listen, pausing in their conversations as if the music itself had a magnetic pull. Emily was no longer just playing. She was part of the evening, weaving a thread of connection through the crowd. As she played, she noticed little things, a couple holding hands by the window, their eyes soft and affectionate, their whispers barely audible over the music. A woman in the corner, staring thoughtfully into her glass of wine, her fingers tapping gently to the beat. A man near the door, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, clearly lost in thought but still listening. There was a stillness in the room, a sense of shared experience, even though the guests were each having their own moment. Emily wasn't sure how much time had passed. It could have been an hour, maybe 2, but she wasn't counting anymore. All that mattered was the music and the way it made her feel. Every key she pressed seemed to lift her higher, carrying her away from the doubts that had once ruled her mind. For the first time in a long while, Emily didn't feel like a waitress or a stranger. She felt like an artist again. It wasn't until the sound of footsteps approaching broke her concentration that she realized the event was almost over. The guests were beginning to leave, their voices growing louder as they said their goodbyes. Emily's fingers paused on the keys, but she didn't stop completely. She let the notes fade out gently as if the music was reluctant to leave the room. As she turned to look behind her, Jane was standing there, smiling at her with a look of quiet approval. "You were amazing," she said, her voice full of warmth. The guests were so impressed. "We've already gotten some great feedback." Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Really?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't make too many mistakes?" "Not a single one that anyone noticed," Jane replied with a laugh. "You were incredible. I'm so glad you agreed to do this." Emily smiled, her heart still racing from the performance. "I'm glad I did too. It felt good to play again." Jane's smile softened. "You've got a real talent, Emily. I'm sure this won't be the last time we call on you to perform." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment Emily felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just a one-time thing. Maybe she could do this more often. Take back what she had lost and finally give music the place it deserved in her life. But then, as the last of the guests filed out, the hotel staff began clearing the space. The magical moment began to dissolve, replaced by the usual end-of-evening tasks. The world was moving on, and Emily was left standing in the empty room, the weight of the piano bench beneath her. As the staff began to pack up, she reluctantly stood up from the piano, her fingers still tingling from the touch of the keys. She had played for hours, but it had felt like no time at all. She was exhausted, but strangely exhilarated, as if the night had given her back a piece of herself that she had almost forgotten existed. As she walked toward the back area of the hotel to change, she heard voices from the staff break room. She wasn't in any hurry, so she paused for a moment, listening. "Did you hear the pianist?" "She was incredible," one of the servers was saying. "Yeah, I didn't even know she could play like that. She really surprised everyone," another voice added. Emily's heart swelled at the words. They weren't talking about her as just a waitress. They were talking about her as the pianist. It was a small thing, but it meant everything. She quickly changed into her uniform again, the weight of the apron feeling oddly heavy after the lightness she'd felt behind the piano. As she walked out of the staff area, she was greeted by a few of her colleagues. They were all smiles, their faces bright after a successful event. "You were amazing," one of the waiters said. "I didn't know you could play like that." Emily shrugged, a little embarrassed but smiling nonetheless. "I used to play a long time ago." "Well, you've still got it," another colleague said. "Maybe you should think about doing it more often." For a moment, Emily didn't know what to say. "Maybe I will," she replied softly, her voice filled with quiet determination. She had no idea what would come next. The world outside was waiting, and it felt like a completely different place than it had just a few hours ago. There was something new in the air, something that had been missing for so long but had come rushing back in a single night. Music, talent, and the courage to take a chance had collided in a way that she hadn't expected, and now, the path ahead seemed just a little bit clearer. As Emily made her way out of the hotel, the cool night air hit her face, refreshing and crisp. The streets were quieter now, the rush of the evening fading into the background. She paused for a moment, standing on the sidewalk outside, looking up at the stars. She had just stepped back into a world she thought she'd left behind, and yet, it felt like a world she had never truly left at all. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her from her thoughts. She pulled it out and saw a message from her mom. "How did it go? I'm so proud of you. I knew you could do it." Emily smiled and typed a quick reply. "It went really well. I played the piano. It felt amazing. Thank you for believing in me." As she hit send, a thought crossed her mind. She didn't know exactly where this would take her, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid to find out. The future felt wide open, full of possibilities she hadn't even considered before. Maybe it wasn't too late to follow the music again. Maybe it wasn't too late to be who she had always wanted to be. The streets seemed a little brighter, now the air a little fresher, as if the world had shifted just for her. Emily didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years she felt ready to meet it. The music had found its way back into her life, and it wasn't leaving anytime soon. And as she walked home, her heart light with possibility, Emily knew that no matter where this new path led her, she had finally found her way back to herself. The following days were a whirlwind for Emily. After the performance, it felt like everything had shifted, even though life on the surface hadn't changed much. She still had to show up at the cafe, still wore the same uniform, still served the same customers. But something inside her had awakened. The music was back, and it wasn't going anywhere this time. The phone call from Jane came a week after the event. Emily had been cleaning a table near the front of the cafe when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen and saw Jane's name. She took a deep breath before answering, trying to steady the nervous excitement that bubbled up in her chest. "Hey, Jane," Emily said, her voice casual, though she couldn't hide the smile creeping up on her face.
"Hey, Emily, I wanted to thank you again for last week. You were a hit. The guests haven't stopped talking about you." Jane's voice was warm, full of enthusiasm. Emily's heart skipped a beat. "Really? That's great to hear."
"There's more," Jane continued, her tone shifting slightly. "We've got another event coming up. It's a little more formal, a private gathering. Would you be interested in performing again?" Emily froze for a moment, the question hanging in the air like a weight. "Another event?" she repeated, unsure if she'd heard her correctly. "Are you sure? I mean, I'm not a professional or anything." Jane laughed gently. "Emily, trust me, you've got something special. You don't have to be a professional to play beautifully. The guests loved you. I know they'll want to hear you again." The idea of performing in front of people again made Emily's heart race, but there was also a flicker of excitement. She hadn't expected this. Not in a million years. "Okay, I'll do it," Emily said before she could second-guess herself. "I'll perform." "Great. I'll send you the details soon," Jane said, sounding pleased. "Thank you for agreeing to do this. You've got this." As she hung up the phone, Emily stood still for a few moments, staring at the screen. The idea of performing again was thrilling, but it also brought a fresh wave of nerves. What if this time she wasn't as good? What if she made a mistake? But the excitement quickly pushed those thoughts aside. She was going to do it, and she was going to do it well. Over the next few days, Emily found herself spending hours at home, sitting at the keyboard, practicing. She played the songs she knew well, the ones she had perfected years ago. She also started working on new pieces, challenging herself with unfamiliar melodies. The music felt like a friend, something she had almost lost but had now rediscovered. With each note, she found herself growing more confident, more in tune with the emotions the music stirred inside her. The performance day arrived quicker than she expected. It was a small gathering, only a handful of people invited, but the pressure felt even more intense than the last time. She spent the morning pacing around her apartment, rehearsing in her head, trying to calm the swirling thoughts that seemed to have taken over. She hadn't even realized how much she had missed performing until now. It was as if she had never truly felt complete without it. When she arrived at the hotel, she was greeted by Jane, who looked as cheerful as ever. The space was smaller than the first event, more intimate. There was a grand piano sitting in the center of the room, and around it were several people all dressed in evening attire. Emily's eyes immediately flickered to the piano. The familiar gleam of its polished surface seemed to make her both nervous and at ease. It was a moment of comfort, as if the piano was waiting for her just like it always had. "You're here," Jane said, pulling Emily into a quick hug. "I'm so happy you could make it. Everyone's really excited to hear you play again." Emily smiled, though she could feel her stomach tighten. "I'm excited too, a little nervous but excited." "You'll be fine," Jane reassured her. "Everyone here knows how talented you are. Just enjoy yourself and remember it's about the music, not the performance." Those words helped, but the nerves didn't go away completely. She wasn't sure they ever would, but she had learned to accept them, to work with them rather than let them control her. And today she was going to play with everything she had. She made her way to the piano, her fingers brushing the keys as she sat down. The soft hum of conversations in the background faded as she focused. The room seemed to hold its breath as she started playing, the first notes flowing out effortlessly. It wasn't a complex piece, but it was one that carried emotion, one she knew well. The soft, lilting melody filled the room, and Emily could feel herself slipping into the rhythm, the familiar pulse of the music grounding her. At first, the guests seemed distracted, sipping their drinks, chatting with one another. But slowly, as the music wove through the air, their voices quieted. Emily could see the shift in their attention. It wasn't anything dramatic, but their steps slowed. Their conversations softened. There was something about the music that made them listen, made them stop in their tracks for just a moment. She wasn't just playing for them. She was connecting with them, sharing a piece of herself through every note. As she moved into a more complex piece, one that required more concentration, she felt her nerves start to creep back in. The tempo was faster, the rhythm more intricate. Her fingers seemed to stumble over the keys, and for a brief moment she worried she might make a mistake. But instead of stopping, she pushed forward, determined not to let the fear win. She could hear the quiet hum of the crowd in the background, but she focused on the music, finding comfort in the familiar structure of the piece. It was then that she noticed the pianist from last time, the one who had been so encouraging. He was standing near the door, his arms crossed, watching her intently. Emily felt a mix of nerves and gratitude. She hadn't expected him to be here, but his presence was oddly reassuring. His gaze was steady, not judgmental, but warm. It was as if he was silently telling her to keep going, that she was doing just fine. The final piece she played was one she hadn't touched in years. It was a beautiful, sweeping melody, full of emotion. As she played, she felt a sense of release, as if the music was finally helping her let go of all the pent-up emotions she had been carrying. It wasn't just a performance, it was a release, a way of expressing everything she had kept hidden. When the last note played, the room fell into a soft silence. Emily didn't move, her fingers lingering over the keys for a moment. She wasn't sure if she had played well or if she had made a fool of herself, but in that moment it didn't matter. What mattered was that she had played with everything she had. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, and then, as if on cue, the room erupted into applause. Emily's heart skipped, and she quickly stood up, bowing slightly. though she still couldn't believe what had just happened. She wasn't expecting this response. She hadn't expected anything at all, really. Jane appeared beside her, a wide grin on her face. "That was incredible, Emily. I'm so proud of you." The guests crowded around, offering compliments, shaking her hand, or even hugging her. "You're so talented," one woman exclaimed. That was the highlight of the evening. Emily's chest swelled with pride, and for the first time she didn't feel like an imposter. She had done it. She had played and they had listened. And not just listened, they had felt something too. As the event came to a close and the guests began to leave, Jane came up to her again. "You were amazing, Emily. I told you you had something special." "I knew it." Emily smiled, her heart still racing. "Thank you. It feels good to be back." "Really back?" Jane gave her a knowing look. "This isn't the last you'll see of this. I think you've got a future in music, Emily." For a moment, Emily didn't know what to say. She had always dreamed of this kind of recognition, but she hadn't dared to believe it was possible. But now, with the music back in her life, she realized something. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe it never had been. The night ended, and as Emily walked out of the hotel, the cool night air greeted her like an old friend. The streets were quiet, the stars shining brightly overhead. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. She had rediscovered her love for music, and now she knew it was time to let it lead her.